Thank you all for joining us. This is ICUJP for February 16th, 2024, in case people from a far off galaxy are looking at this and way in the future. So they
Star
know
Trek reference.
Yes, star date February 16th, 2024. Uh, and We're glad that you all could join us, whether you're watching this online or you're watching this live with us right now. And In the chat, you're seeing a link tree that we've done that has a lot of information about ICUJP. It has a link to our website. Um, there is you can donate there. You can also do that on Eventbrite if you want to do it on PayPal. Information on the AFSC Apartheid-Free Communities program. So take a look at that. And if your constituent organization can join that, that would be great. Also, media that we have been on with, for example, the Lawyers Guild, NPR, our YouTube channel, and speakers that have written things for us or are working on documentaries. And you can even go to our Threadless store and get a lovely t-shirt that has ICUJP on it. And speaking of, if you go there, we are a small organization, not in height or anything, but actually in the number of people that do the work for us of doing things like sending out all the emails you get, all the social media that goes up, helping to book uh, the great speakers that we have every week, and uh, making sure that we're all understanding and involved in the issues that are happening that seem to come very fast, uh, day after day. And one of the things that helps us is being able to donate. So if you go to the ICUJP site, you can do that. You can click on our website and there'll be a big donate button there. And anything that you can give, if either it's a one-time donation or you can do monthly, all of that can be very, very helpful in helping us, uh, keep up technology wise and be able to maybe even attend conferences where we can help or disrupt. It depends on what we want to do. So if you all can take a look at that if you haven't and join us, that would be great. Steve, did you want to make any announcements about anything that's coming up?
Well, I did want to have you display an announcement that we're releasing. We've devoted virtually every Friday forum since October 7 to the crisis in the Middle East. And Rick was very helpful in gathering all of the programs we've done in the last several months into a single announcement with thumbnail sketches so that you can go directly to these very important talks we've had throughout this period. We're proud of the work we've done lately in focusing on this conflict. Rick is displaying on the screen, just so you get familiar with it, this set of programs. There they are. You'll be getting this by email. Please save it. You can click on each one of the programs we've done over the last few months with very important speakers. And it's a real resource. I hope you'll share it with others. I think it's a dynamic set of talks that we consider very important to the work we've always done for 22 years, and especially what we're doing currently. So you're seeing that on the screen. I think Rick can put a link in the chat, and then to our full mailing list, we'll be sending it out as well. I want to
Yep.
really thank Rick. This takes a tremendous amount of work to pull all of this together in a consolidated, easy, accessible way. So thanks, Rick, and thanks everybody for paying attention to this work.
Los Angeles. Yeah, this was interesting to do because as I was learning on Nation Builder about how to do lists like this, I could feel the the neurons that have been dead in my brain for years actually start firing again because I figured it out. But yeah, I think this is a really good thing that we've done because in looking at all of this, um, you can take a look at the diversity of the speakers that we've had, from teachers in the at UTLA, LA County Teachers Union, that have been forced to stop um, teaching because they're talking about things like Israel and Palestine. Groups like If Not Now, who are working with Jewish partners in order to get the word out about this what's happening in the region. Annie Zonneveld from Muslims for Progressive Values, the aforementioned apartheid-free communities, um, previous board members like Dr. Kamal Abu Shamiseh, and speakers like Marjorie Cohn, John Parker, Steve Chase. Um, it's been a really diverse group of people that have had different types of uh, reactions to what has happened. So I think we're going to go ahead and do our feature talk today. So this was something that I thought was very interesting. And, you know, we saw a article about what Nicole Morse was dealing with. You know, everybody has certain individual um, issues that they have when they start to speak about the reality of the situation in Israel and Palestine, but one of the overriding factors that I think all of our speakers have had to deal with is the idea that you can't have your opinion, or um, uh, you can, but it comes at a cost. And we wanted to invite Nicole because they uh, have some insights about how to deal with this type of thing, and also these are things that we might be able to bring to our own personal lives and our own personal discussions. Um, so I want to introduce Nicole. They are a member of Jewish Voice for Peace in South Florida, uh, and we'll speak about the role queer and trans anti-Zionist Jews are playing in the fight for free Palestine, and also in the face of unprecedented repression of pro-Palestinian voices. They've recently published original research in Collateral and in other venues, and their book Selfie Aesthetics: Teaching Trans Feminist Futures in Self-Representational Art is available through Duke University Press. So, Nicole, good to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you for the invitation to join you all today. And please give me a heads up if you're having difficulty hearing me. There's a high wind that was unexpected, but hopefully the internet connection will not be a problem. So as Rick said, my focus today is going to be on the role of trans and queer Jewish anti-Zionists, because that is the intersection that I inhabit. And I also think it's a particularly interesting and important way to look at the fight for Palestine these days. And, who am I? As Rick said, I ended up resigning from a leadership position at my university, Florida Atlantic University, after some sustained pressure to abandon my anti-Zionist principles and to take on a Zionist position. What I detailed in Truth Out is that this was something that, did not emerge just after October 7th. It's been a persistent element of my experience at the institution, but it certainly became more severe after October 7th. And in my case, what was particularly noticeable to me is the way that my identity as a queer person and my role as the director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies intersected with my pro-Palestine work that's very much a religious principle for me. And so in my case, I belong to Tzedek Chicago, which is an anti-Zionist synagogue and is affiliated with Jewish Voice for Peace. So, and I know there's several JVPers on this call. So, Jewish Voice for Peace has been a lifeline for me for a decade. And to be asked to leave that group because it is, quote unquote, so radical or because it is anti-Semitic was deeply disturbing. And one of the things that kept emerging in the conversations I had with administrators was the idea that the kinds of religious commitments to anti-Zionism that are part of my life and many Jews of conscience lives were not being recognized as Jewish. They were not being recognized as a valid practice of Judaism, whereas secular Jews who are Zionist were being regarded as experts on what is Jewish and what Judaism can be. So in one conversation toward the end of my time as director, I asked an administrator, why is it the role of the institution to determine what the right way to be Jewish is? There were donors who are secular Zionist Jews who said that I was anti-Semitic. And I said, I'm a religious Jew, I'm observant, and I'm anti-Zionist. These are different ways of being Jewish. And what I was struck by is the way that for so many people in the mainstream, Zionism has become so dominant that they don't recognize other ways of being Jewish. And this is, of course, anti-historical. So what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about the kind of rich anti-Zionist Jewish religious life and culture that exists. And so much of that intersects with queer and trans Jewish communities, which I also want to investigate. And in some of my current research, I'm looking at what it is that brings together these communities, or what it is that shapes so many anti-Zionist Jews to be either queer inclusive, or how many queer and trans Jews become anti-Zionists. But I want to just start with, Jewish anti-Zionism is in fact a very long and storied tradition. It has existed as long as Zionism, so since the 1800s. On the far left, we have Rav Teitelbaum, who founded the Satmar Hasidim, and of course they have the group Neturei Karta, who are very far right. They don't agree with me on many things, but they're a very familiar sight at Palestine protests, and certainly these ultra Hasidic groups are Jewish, whether or not I want to worship the way they do. There's no question that they are Jews who are very much aligned with anti-Zionism. In the middle of the screen, you see Ilan Pappé, one of the new historians, Israeli historians who began in the 70s and 80s to investigate the records of, actually more in the 80s and 90s, to investigate the records of the Nakba, and started writing new history that accurately reflected what had actually happened. And Ilan Pappé, like many of the new historians, was kicked out of Israel. So he now works at, I think, the University of Exeter. And he's been very clear on his opposition to Zionism. Of course, Jewish Voice for Peace, an anti-Zionist Jewish group that I believe for a while was not anti-Zionist, was non-Zionist, but now is firmly anti-Zionist and has existed as a small but mighty force, and now growing more and more since the 80s. And then on the far right, you see a poster of the Jewish Labor Bund, which was a very strong anti-Zionist Jewish voice in the late 1800s and early 1900s, believing in internationalism and believing that rather than Jews being one nation among all the nations, just like everyone else with our own state and our own opportunities to cause harm, that Jews should be throughout the world, Jews should be safe throughout the world, and we should be part of the international effort to build a just world where workers and people of all faiths and practices would be safe. So Jewish anti-Zionism is a long-standing and powerful tradition, and prior to World War II was a dominant force across the world. It was really only after World War II that Zionism began to become dominant, and in the 60s that it became so central to American Judaism. One particular text that I'm finding very powerful in my own thinking is Shaul Magid's book, The Necessity of Exile. And this is a book of essays on the relationship between exile or galut and Judaism. And among Zionists, the negation of the exile, the elimination of exile and diaspora, gathering in all Jews to Israel is often a very important principle. And this idea that exile and the particular experience of exile should be negated, should be eliminated, is something that Magid really argues against. And although Magid does this as a straight cis man and doesn't really consider questions of queerness, what's been really powerful for me is seeing the ways that his writing resembles work in queer theory that speaks of queerness as always on the horizon, as the not quite yet, the not quite here, something we are striving for rather than something that is. And this idea of queerness and transness as a becoming, as an emergent. And so one phrase from Magid's book that really stood out to me and seems to be in close dialogue with queer and trans theory is living in exile is to exist in a productive state of tension with the not yet, a state that requires constructive modes of coexistence. So this idea that by living in exile, and I live in South Florida, I was born in Colorado, my family lives in Vermont, I am a diasporic American Jew. And by being here in the diaspora, I have the opportunity to be in communities like this one in Vermont. Jews, Quakers, and Unitarian Universalists, we all have to gather together because there's so few of all of us that we make our own little interfaith communities, right? Like by being in these spaces where we are among strangers, we learn to, and we have the obligation to create community, to create models of coexistence. And this is something that is also the case for queer and trans people who are scattered throughout the world. Queer and trans people emerge in families unexpectedly and are not necessarily having the same experiences as their extended relatives. So we have this opportunity to build connections and build bridges. So as I mentioned, I belong to Tzedek Chicago, so it is the first egalitarian anti-Zionist synagogue. Like I said, Neturei Karta, the Satmar Hasidim, they are very firmly anti-Zionist. They have lots of synagogues, but they are not egalitarian. They are very patriarchal, very traditional, whereas Tzedek is egalitarian. And I'll just play quickly a couple of little videos. Let me see. Yes, it should be set up.
Hi, my name is Maya Shenwar, and my pronouns are she, her. I live in Chicago, and I'm a member of Tzedek Chicago because I'm so grateful for a Jewish community that is actively committed to social justice, including racial justice and gender justice and anti-Zionism. And it's also a community that affirms a wide range of spiritual beliefs and non-beliefs and encourages creativity and playfulness and freedom in the context of Judaism. I never actually imagined myself finding a Jewish community as an adult until I found Tzedek. And I'm also so glad to be able to raise my kid within this community where he can experience Jewish culture within a welcoming framework that rejects exclusionism and strives toward liberation. I would encourage other people who are looking for this type of congregation to become a member of Tzedek. There is no place like it.
Hi, my name is Nikki. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm a member of Tzedek Chicago because it's crucial for me that my Jewish practice be with people who are also committed to a Judaism that is about anti-racism, anti-Zionism, inclusion of queer and trans people. Together, we're building a Judaism that's radical, adventurous, caring, compassionate, and open-minded. I hope to see you at Torah study, at Shabbat services, or anywhere else you'd like to join us from anywhere in the world.
So Tzedek Chicago has been a huge part of my life since it was founded in 2015. I was able to publish my resignation letter in Truth Out in part because Maya Shenwar, who's editor-in-chief of Truth Out, was able to direct me in the right direction to make it an effective way to speak out. We weekly on Sundays hold a Jewish fast for Gaza, and we're on week 18 of that. And during that practice, we fast and donate the money that we would have spent on groceries to either Middle East Children's Alliance, Palestinian Children Relief Fund, or now UNRWA. So with Tzedek Chicago, it is not an explicitly queer and trans synagogue, but the number of queer and trans members is astonishing. And it's one of the places that I am able to find an incredible queer and trans Jewish community. And it's another example of the ways that queer and trans Jews and anti-Zionist Jews are not just connected, but an overlapping community. Queer and trans Jews and anti-Zionism is a powerful alliance in part because what we managed to do is refute the pinkwashing that Israel has tried to use to depict itself as, quote unquote, the only democracy in the Middle East, but also the only safe haven for queer people, the only, quote unquote, feminist place in the Middle East, etc. Sarah Schulman's book, Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International, is a fantastic exploration of the queer activists' own journey to Palestinian solidarity from a place where she had been raised, like many Jews, with Hasbara or Israeli propaganda that asserts that Palestine and Palestinians are all right-wing, hateful, oppressive. The number of times that I've been at a protest and someone has said, if you went to Gaza, they would behead you, they would kill you. This is the argument that's being made, and it is not true necessarily. And even if it is true that there are some people who are radically right-wing and homophobic in the Muslim and Palestinian community, that does not justify occupation, siege, and apartheid. So this idea that queer people and the well-being of queer people and ideas of feminism are used to justify the oppression of others, is something that as queer anti-Zionist Jews, we can reject in a way that is particularly powerful, which is one of the reasons that I think people are so passionate about trying to suppress our voices. And certainly for me, in my experience with being pushed out of a job as director of women, gender, and sexuality studies, there was a clear expectation from donors who are Zionist feminists that a Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies should always be pro-Israel, because how could we be pro-Palestine given their perception of Palestine? What becomes really powerful is to challenge those narratives. So yeah, we had 2 trans anti-Zionist Jews and 2 queer Palestinian organizers in conversation. And this is something where I think so many people don't even imagine that there are queer Palestinians, and having the opportunity to meet with and work with queer Palestinians has been incredibly helpful for me, because I understand in a new way how they navigate the contradictions and the complications of their experience and their existence, doubly exiled as refugees, and then also exiled within their own community. And in having conversations with queer Palestinians, that has given me more room to reflect on what is the experience of queer and trans Jews, where often we are also doubly exiled, though not to the extent and not with the violence that queer Palestinians experience. But many of us have been pushed out of our own families, and we are pushed out of the Jewish community. And from that place of double exile, we are building new communities, and those communities include our comrades who are queer Palestinians. So I want to just spend a few minutes talking about the richness of queer anti-Zionist Judaism, because like I said, I think sometimes people don't realize that this isn't simply people who are rejecting Judaism and loudly protesting, but in fact, we're building a whole Jewish culture that's incredibly rich, grounded in ritual, grounded in Torah, and is an important spiritual foundation for many of us. So we have houses of study, Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva, which is based in Chicago, but has classes online. Svara has existed for quite some time and is a space where people learn to read Torah and Talmud and to participate in Jewish study the way that it has been conducted for centuries, for generations. Shel Ma'ala is a newer online yeshiva that was founded by two trans Jews. And Shel Ma'ala offers a range of classes, both traditional Talmud classes and also other kinds of classes that explore Jewish tradition. And all of this is from a queer anti-Zionist Jewish perspective. There's a lot of culture, art, music, and ritual that's emerging within queer and trans anti-Zionist communities. So on the left, we've got a video that I'll play in just a moment, but on the right, there's examples of some of the calendars that the Radical Jewish Calendar Collective creates, both wall calendars that feature art by incredible Jewish artists, mostly queer and trans anti-Zionist Jews, and then also a yearly planner that is named after Olam Haba, the world to come, called Dreaming the World to Come. And these are a wonderful intervention in the traditional economy of Jewish time space, where people typically have, whatever calendar the cemetery sent them or whatever calendar they got from some Zionist organization, such as the Jewish National Fund. And these are ways of creating a space for alternative ways of marking and tracking time. And I want to share with you a song for peace led by Koach Baruch Fraser, who is an anti-Zionist trans Jew who has been creating incredible music for the Black Lives Matter movement and also for Jewish community.
I'm Dr. Koach Baruch Fraser, and I'm a fifth-year student at RSC.
And I'm Marcus Holly, and I'm a Mechina year student here at RSC.
And today we're going to sing Sim Shalom with the setting that came through me, and in Osei Shalom with the setting of Nava Tehillah. Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, oh, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, oh, Sim Shalom. Place peace and goodness and blessing on the world. Grace, loving kindness, compassion on us. Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, oh, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, oh, Sim Shalom. Place peace and goodness and blessing on the world. Grace, loving kindness, compassion on us. shalom, osim shalom, oseh shalom bivroma, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'yakol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Oseh shalom bivroma, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'yakol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Oseh shalom bivroma, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'yakol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen.
And I'll feature just a couple of my favorite anti-Zionist trans Jewish artists here. Micah Bazant, who does incredible work that has been featured throughout the movement for trans lives and also the movement for Palestinian liberation. And then MJ Smith, whose work has included some incredible pieces recently for Ceasefire. But I wanted to feature this one, which is a reference to a Talmudic teaching that one should always have, on one hand, the message that I am but dust and ashes, and on the other hand, the message, the world was made for me, and to find that balance between pride and humility is the space that the rabbis tell us we should be trying to occupy. And so this idea that anti-Zionist, queer Jewish cultural work is deeply informed by the tradition and is deeply connected to our teachers, our rabbis, to centuries of learning and scholarship, is something that I want to make sure to share with people, because often the work that we do gets dismissed as not aligned with the tradition. And in fact, it can be, deeply aligned with tradition at the same time as we are profoundly transforming it. And I want to just conclude, for me, music and the music that's been emerging within queer and trans Jewish communities is a really important lifeline. And I want to conclude with this song for Ceasefire, which comes from a collective, Songs for Ceasefire, that is largely queer and trans led. And this song is based on a poem, Ve'ahavta, by Aurora Levins Morales, who is a queer anti-Zionist Jew. And her poem is quoted at the beginning of the video, and then we'll be able to experience the song. And then I'm excited to take questions and to talk with you all. Thank you again for having me. And this is We Have More Life by Adam Gottlieb as part of the Songs for Ceasefire collective.
They have much more death than we do, but we have much more life than them. They make sacred symbols into weapons of war we condemn. They say bombs protect our homeland. We say that home could not be mine. They say Zion can be owned, and we cry out, Free Palestine. They have much more death than we do, but we have much more life than them. They make make sacred symbols into weapons of war. We condemn. They say bombs protect our homeland. We say that home could not be mine. They say Zion can be owned, and we cry out, free Palestine. More death than we do, but we have much more life than them. They make sacred symbols into weapons of war. We condemn. And they say bombs protect our homeland. We say that home could not be mine. And they say Zion can be owned, and we cry out, free Palestine. Much more death than we do, but we have much more life than them. They make sacred symbols into weapons of war. We condemn. And they say bombs protect our homeland. We say that home could not be mine. They say Zion can be owned, and we cry out, free Palestine. Yes, we cry out, free Palestine. We cry out, free Palestine.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to present and share. And I just want to reiterate that for me, why it's so important to celebrate queer and trans anti-Zionist Judaism is because we are at this horrific moment. And we need the strength and the courage that comes from spiritual practice. And so for me, that's what keeps me going. Thank you.
Thank you. This was pretty amazing, Nicole. And first off, you gave me some really good ideas to add to that Spotify playlist that we put together on music of the movement, and it's really good to be able to get your perspective. So how it normally works is that people will raise their hands either electronically or the old-fashioned analog way on the screen. And we have a couple. Steve, if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Nicole. Such a powerful presentation, and I love the use of music and spoken word. Very strong for us this morning. I have three questions related that really are meant to invite you to elaborate on aspects of what you told us. I'm very interested to hear you elaborate on what you believe the Jewish principles are that lead to anti-Zionism. You've made it clear, and we've all experienced this, of the isolation and the singularity, as if all of Judaism only teaches Zionism, and I can sense that there's more to it. Secondly, we really would like a fuller explanation of what happened to you at your university. What was the nature of your program originally? How long were you teaching it? And then essentially, what got you in trouble from their standpoint? And finally, we're always interested in challenges people face and whether they remain within an institution, fight within that institution bravely and courageously, or step aside and reach the point that they must ethically and morally continue their work from outside the university. That's a huge dilemma, and I think we're all interested in how you navigated that.
Thank you so much for those questions. I'll start with the second two, and then I'll move back to the first one. So my experience was that I was director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Florida Atlantic University for 4 years. And I also am a faculty member at the university in the School of Communication and Multimedia Studies. In 2019, Florida passed a law that made it illegal for professors to criticize the state of Israel unless we simultaneously criticized another democracy for the same thing. And so at that point, I started having conversations with administration saying, you know, I need to understand what I can and can't do, because criticizing Israel may come up, especially because I teach gender studies and we consider pinkwashing and we examine that. And unfortunately, you know, every nation is unique. There is no other nation that is precisely like Israel. I am happy to criticize the United States of America, and I do indeed. But these are very different democracies, and different criticisms are valid. So from that point on, for me, it felt like it was a obvious tension that everyone should be aware of where I was coming from, and that this was an important principle for me. I was also aware that the National Women's Studies Association, which is the scholarly organization for my field, has taken a strong stand in support of Palestinian liberation over and over. So as director of gender studies, I felt that, you know, I was aligned with my field, and I am in my principles. There was some tension at one point when, before my time, the center brought Angela Davis to speak, and certain donors became extremely irate about her supposed anti-Semitism. And so this was, you know, a kind of percolating tension, but I had managed to navigate it as director for several years. I was asked by students to become the faculty advisor for Students for Justice in Palestine. When administrators learned about that, they were very disturbed. They asked, like, can't there be a different student group that advocates for Palestine, one that's less radical? And I explained that JVP and SJP have, you know, very similar beliefs, and I'm already a member of JVP. And I was told, you know, never mention that, like, don't allow that to get out publicly. And then it did get out publicly, because on October 17th, I was arrested in a ceasefire action at Senator Rick Scott's office. And so there was briefly a period of, you know, some right-wing kind of attention. I was discussed in some far-right rags that were kind of ridiculous in their coverage. I got a little bit of hate mail, but not too much. And honestly, it then settled down. And I've been very fortunate that I have not been, you know, periodically there'll be kind of like a flurry of doxing attempts, but it doesn't go very far. But they've all been geared toward trying to get me fired. And then a few donors just took this on as their project. And these were donors who had long supported the center, and they argued that an anti-Semite should not be in charge of the center. And so months and months of meetings, I mean, almost 4 months of meetings with administrators asking me to defend how my religious beliefs are not anti-Semitic. And this is as a person, you can't see now, but I always wear a kippah, I wear tzitzit, I daven every morning. Like, everyone knows that I'm extremely observant. But I'm being asked over and over to explain how I'm not anti-Semitic. I got all these information requests to deliver, you know, data about how I was doing my job. They were looking for places where I might have made a slight error, if I hadn't, dotted an I or crossed a T. So it was getting to the point where I really had to ask myself if I could be effective. And this is a gender studies center in Florida. So I had been spending a lot of time pushing back. They tried to cancel some of our classes. I defended them. I've been involved in a lot of advocacy to protect the curriculum. And that depended upon me having at least a reasonable working relationship with administrators. But after October 17th, after October 7th, my relationship with administrators was incredibly toxic, and I could not defend the center. They did not respect me. They would not take me seriously. And then meanwhile, I was seeing these signs that they were looking for some reason to fire me that was not related to my politics. And I was told directly, what happened to Claudine Gay? That could happen to you. The idea that some pretextual reason would be brought up to force me to resign. And so from that position, I did some reflection and I decided that I would have a greater ability to speak for the movement and speak out if I chose to resign at my own time, rather than getting pushed out for some kind of pretextual reason that would undermine my credibility. So that was the reason I made that decision, but it was heartbreaking because it is really important to me to support my students and to advocate for women, gender, and sexuality studies in Florida to fight back against the censorship, overreach, and government repression. And it was really hard to make that decision. But in the circumstances that I was in, it did seem ultimately like the best way for me to speak out for Palestine and to put the center in a position where it can be defended, including by these donors who I do not think are correct. I think they're absolutely wrong in their actions, but they have been eager to defend the center in the past, and I hope that they will be in the future. So that was the process of making the decision. And subsequently, I also have decided to leave the university altogether because I know that I don't have a future in my career there. And FAU is an institution that has at least 4, and I think there are more now, official partnerships with the state of Israel. Our deans go on junkets to Israel with DeSantis. Like, the relationship is so deep that it's just not a place where I have a future. So I hope that answers that question. And again, I don't know. There's still a part of me that wishes I could stay and fight, but I need to do what I can do where I can feel effective. And I did not feel like I could be effective. I will be moving to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I'm really excited about that. One of the synagogues I belong to, that synagogue is a non-Zionist synagogue, Hanenu Baltimore, is right there. So I've been worshiping with them for years, and now I'll get to be in that community. So yeah, I feel very fortunate to have found a place. And during my interview, my entire day-long interview, I wore a Jews in Solidarity with Palestine button because I figured might as well put it out there right to begin with. And they did end up offering me a job. So again, I'm very fortunate. And then regarding your first question, I think the first thing I want to say is that ultimately, it doesn't matter what Jewish tradition tells us if we can see, based on the ethics that matter to us, that Zionism is wrong, that ethno-supremacy is clearly unethical. And I would say that the ethics that guide me to see that an ethno-state is never going to be able to be ethical, that those come from Judaism. And those come from what I see as a core commitment to liberation and to justice within Judaism. And that's the position that, for example, Tzedek Chicago takes. But there is a long tradition of religious Jewish scholarship that discusses the more kind of textual challenges to Zionism. And so that would be primarily what informs the Satmar Hasidim, where they would argue that the Jews should not gather in the Holy Land until the Messiah comes. And that if we do try to bring the Moshiach faster, that is itself, a contradiction of God's law. And I think there is, evidence of their position if we see that, this effort to bring the Jews back to the Holy Land, has certainly not so it has certainly not resulted in Ha'olam Haba, the world to come. We seem, in my opinion, further from the Moshiach than ever. But I would say that's not my own primary conviction, because there is plenty in the Torah that I find extremely disturbing. There's plenty in the Torah that, directly can be taken to support the ethnic cleansing and genocide that we're watching right now. And so ultimately, for me, there's a question of kind of an ethics that goes outside the text, even if it emerges from the text. So I think those two strands within religious Judaism support anti-Zionism and complement each other, but they do have slightly different emphases.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Dave Clennon, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicole, for this morning's presentation. I noticed at the beginning of the video of the last song that you played, which is so beautiful, that there was a text over the screen at the very beginning, and it mentioned the prophet Roque Dalton, or Roque Dalton, and his work would have so much meaning to our group. He was if it's the same person I'm thinking of, he was a Salvadoran poet who died very young. And for me, I wish Fidel Sanchez were here today, because he could speak with authority on this subject. But I just would like to hear from you, if you are familiar with the context in which his name was raised. It means so much to us because of our involvement in the struggle for liberation in El Salvador, and the way Roque Dalton expressed it in his poetry. So that was a very meaningful tie for me to see that before that wonderful video. And I just wondered also if any of the lines of the song were taken from a poem by Roque Dalton. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you could probably tell me more about Roque Dalton. I am not very familiar with his work. It's been brought up within Tzedek Chicago by Adam Gottlieb, who wrote that song. And Adam is very much connected to Latin American liberation work. But Adam took that line from a poem called Ve'ahavta by Aurora Levins Morales, who is a queer anti-Zionist Jew, and I put a link in the chat to that poem. And Ve'ahavta is the commitment that we say right after the Shema. So the Shema being the statement that God is one, and then the Ve'ahavta is lines from Devarim, the 5th book of the Torah, that say, keep these words as a memento with you. And so Aurora Levins Morales wrote this poem titled Ve'ahavta that has the lines, they have much more death than we do, though we have much more life than they do. I think right now I have the song stuck in my head, so I can't remember the original text. But yes, the song is then based on Aurora Levins Morales's poem, which has the phrase, "Thus spoke the poet Roque Dalton," and is kind of informed by Morales's relationship to Dalton. So it's a network of connections. And, I do remember the poems that I encountered of Dalton's with Adam's work were very moving. but that's about all I can say. I definitely encourage people to check out Aurora Levins Morales.
Thank you.
You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the fact that in Hebrew and Yiddish culture, and um, in the Arabic tradition, and even in in Spanish-speaking countries in South America and in Europe, even the Luso Portuguese-speaking countries, there is a tradition of musicians working with poets that we've kind of lost in the um, English tradition. So, you could have somebody like I was listening to Marcel Khalife working with the brilliant Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish on several albums, right? Or a brilliant musician like the Brazilian Milton Nascimento working with some great poets. So that just came to me, and I think it's something that we lose in a lot of English speaking um, cultural context, you know. But I want to thank you for this talk because I think that for those of us that maybe do not come from the Jewish or Hebrew tradition, or are expanding our understanding of what it is to be queer or trans or all of that. Your talk made it easier for us to understand how it works, or the challenges you have, and um, how we can engage in making an open pathway for people to be able to express themselves. Um, and I think what's worrying is that for yourself, when being able to express your true self and how you feel, it costs you your job at at a major university. And I in the chat I posted some links from Jewish Voice for Peace, including the half hour for Gaza. And I wanted to see if there were any other additional ways that you thought that we could be engaging with the work that you're doing and some of the key issues and that are happening at this moment.
Thank you, Rick. And just to respond to the first thing you said, I agree that the relationship between poetry and music can be so powerful. And I will just uplift Adam's work. Adam is the one of the cantorial soloists for Tzedek Chicago, and they do a lot of work with poetry and music. I would agree that absolutely the Power Half Hour that JVP runs is just one of the most immediate ways to get connected to anti-Zionist Jewish organizing. And, it happens 5 days a week, and it's there at noon your time for those of you on the West Coast. And yeah, I mean, I go maybe once or twice a week, but it's a way to tap in, to find out what's going on, and to take simple actions in community. It sounds like many of you are already doing a lot of work for Gaza, but what I would say is another thing that might be really useful is this link from Jewish Voice for Peace on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And so being able to be a voice speaking up about the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, to be able to describe, what anti-Semitism really is incredibly valuable. And to be knowledgeable about the way that these are being conflated, because one of the things that really shocked me was not just how readily administrators accepted the accusation that I was anti-Semitic, but how other people couldn't even understand where the accusation was coming from, which is great. God bless them for knowing that I'm not anti-Semitic. But because they didn't understand the ways that this has been advanced, then they weren't really ready to support me. And so one of the final links I will share with you is Drop the ADL. And this is a collective project of a wide range of leftist groups, especially racial justice groups, who are trying to raise awareness of the way that the ADL actually functions. The ADL, purports to be a civil rights organization. In some cases, they are, but more and more, their focus has been on undermining racial justice organizing, particularly Palestine organizing, but not exclusively. And so they've targeted organizers who are in organizing for racial justice, organizing for Palestine. They've targeted us in a wide range of ways, including illegal ways, such as contracting with police departments to obtain surveillance records about JVP and SJP. So I would encourage folks to check out droptheadl.org and learn more about that organization so that you can also raise awareness of the fact that they are not the place we should be going for our information about anti-Semitism. There is one more group I'll highlight now that I'm thinking about it, which is Parseo. And Parseo does an anti-Semitism training that connects anti-Semitism to other forms of white supremacy. And so rather than the ADL, if your group or a group is ever looking for information about anti-Semitism, how to fight anti-Semitism, I really recommend Parseo's anti-Semitism curriculum, because that puts the fight against anti-Semitism in dialogue with the fight against white supremacy, with the fight against Zionism, etc.
Rebecca, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you for that talk. It was very inspiring and empowering. I've been attending the JVP half hour quite almost every day, and I just find it really grounding too. So I highly encourage everybody to check it out, even if you have it playing in the background. It's just very uplifting. And they have these tools that you can email your representatives or call them, make it very easy. You're done in like 15 minutes. So your sacrifices, it reminded me about what my aunt went through as probably one of the first trans Latina women in the 70s, trying to fit into the Catholic Church. And but my question is, in thinking about hearing about the news about Alexei Navalny passing away in prison today, are there any LGBTQ plus or queer activists in Israel that are in jail that we should know about, and we should be amplifying their voices and their causes?
That is a great question. And I don't have that information to hand. What I will recommend is this book, if I can find it. I might have to send it out later. But it's an anti-Zionist Israeli Jew who is trans, I believe, who created a book that was recently released called Bloodlines. And it's a very powerful work. And through following that author's Instagram, I've been seeing a little bit more about that side, but it's not something I have a deep knowledge of. If I can find, let me grab the author's name at least for you. But
okay, great. Or you could put it in the chat.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is so important, and folks may already know about this, so forgive me if I'm repeating information you already know, is that in particular, queer and trans Palestinians are targeted by Israel. And that's, one of the ways that Israel works to get collaborators and infiltrators is by pressuring queer and trans Palestinians with the threat of outing if they don't cooperate with the Israeli regime. And of course, this is something that means that Israel is using the homophobia, of, say, Hamas against queer Palestinians, but not in the name of trying to actually challenge Hamas's homophobia. Instead, they're really amplifying it. So I think in particular, my sense would be that, if we were going to look for queer prisoners whose causes need to be uplifted right now, it might actually be queer and trans Palestinians. And so Bloodlines is by Meital Yaniv. And Yaniv was, like most Israelis, an IOF soldier, and has had a journey away from Zionism.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just add to
Thanks for
that.
the question.
One of the first protests I went to, I saw a group of men and a couple were holding hands, and they were wearing the keffiyehs, and they just seemed so at peace after, and so liberate. It was so uplifting just to see them standing in Grand Central Market, being able to hold hands out in public.
Great. Bonnie, you had a question.
Thanks. Yeah, Nicole, this is probably not quite in your, special, area of work, but I've been trying to ask a lot of people about whether anybody here has direct connections with groups in Israel. I'm thinking in particular of Breaking the Silence and Standing Together. And I know I asked someone in JVP in Pasadena that, and they were kind of like, well, because they're in Israel, they can't say everything out loud that we would want to say, so we don't necessarily want to be affiliated with them. I didn't kind of buy that, but I'm just wondering whether whether your group or groups have any direct connections to some of the anti-Zionist activity in Israel.
So I don't have any direct connections. I follow Breaking the Silence. I think they do incredible work. And then Shoresh has a US chapter. So I think that might be a useful place to start. Shoresh is a Israeli group, but their US chapter is able to be more explicitly anti-Zionist, to criticize Israel and of the US in more outspoken ways. I know that Breaking the Silence has recently been called out by the BDS movement. And so, but at the same time, the Palestinian members of Standing Together, not Breaking the Silence. If I got that confused, I apologize.
Yeah.
Standing Together has been called out by BDS, but the Palestinian members of Standing Together have responded and, said that they do not appreciate that feedback from the BDS movement. And so I think that's one of those situations where, in particular, as people in the US, I think one of the strongest things we can do is focus on our own government's complicity, because there's no one Palestinian view, right? There are Palestinians who are working with Standing Together and who think it's incredibly important. There are Palestinians who are part of the BDS call, et cetera. And then here we are in the US, and as much as I think I've said Israel many more times today than the United States, ultimately, the US is the superpower that maintains the possibility for this genocide. And I feel like it's most helpful for me to direct my energy there. But yeah, I think Shoresh US has strong ties to the Israeli group Shoresh, so they might be a useful place to look.
Thank you.
Dave, you had a follow-up question.
Yes, a quick question about where we can access the music video that you showed us near the end of your presentation. I believe the title was "We Have More Life." Can we just go to YouTube and do a search to find that video? It's so powerful. It would be something great to share on Facebook or Twitter.
I can
Yeah,
just say,
let me. Oh, I was just going to say it's in the slideshow, but let me just share the direct link as well. So that's it.
Thank you.
Great. And we had a follow-up from Steve.
Thank you. Nicole, this is a unique opportunity to have you with us because throughout this conflict and even before, this group has always examined what has become a tension between free speech and academic freedom on campus and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think people are currently exploiting the controversy to try to kill DEI initiatives. To set that up for everybody, there's a claim that our campuses are rife with liberals and leftists, that they have canceled conservative speakers, that they have demanded a pledge of allegiance to diversity, equity, and inclusion among faculty members, that professors such as Carol Hoven at Harvard, who wrote and lectured on the basis that there are only two genders, was attacked and criticized at Harvard. I believe she may have resigned. So you had all of that going on. Then we have what's been happening since October 7, and people say, well, now the chickens are coming home to roost, because if you can indoctrinate students in favor of diversity, equity, and inclusion, why can't we indoctrinate them in pro-Israel theories and support? So if you are sensing that tension, believe it or not, the New York Times this morning has published an article on this. So it is a very it's an area that has to be navigated through, and I think in some ways you're at the center of this, and I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on all of it.
Thank you for the question. It is one of the biggest areas for me of research and activism right now. And as queer and trans activists have long said, the New York Times should be called the New York Crimes because of the way that it distorts issues. And so what I would say is that it's important to put this in a historical context where pro-Palestine speech has always been suppressed. I did my graduate work at the University of Chicago, which is famed for having a very strong commitment to free speech and one of the more free speech favoring policies in the country. And even there, Students for Justice in Palestine was frequently the one group that would have its posters questioned by administration, et cetera. And so even within a space that was advocating very strongly for absolute free speech, resisting the idea of a hate speech code, et cetera, when there was an attempt to censor speech, it was pro-Palestine speech. And for me, this is one of the reasons that I feel very passionately about as much free speech as possible on campus, because I do think that we always have to be aware that attempts to censor speech will limit the speech of disfavored groups. And those disfavored groups will include leftist groups, often more than right-wing groups. And one of the things that I think is the tension right now around DEI is that, for one, DEI programs at universities encompass a wide range of activities. And so in Florida, they're targeting things like having an LGBTQ student center, challenging and complicated position to be in right now, to be advocating for DEI, when just 2 to 3 years ago, I was part of faculty groups who were actively criticizing the DEI initiatives that were, simply trying to portray the university as quote unquote diverse without actually supporting the institutional changes that would make diversity possible. I think it's important to recognize that challenges to speech or criticisms of speech are not the same as silencing. And I think this is something that many people on the right don't understand. That if you have a perspective, such as Hoven's perspective, that is contradicted by the vast majority of people in your field, and they can offer empirical evidence to challenge your perspective, that is simply academics. That is what we do. We are in the pursuit of truth. That means that not all views are equally valid, and we will criticize each other. And that is very different than the kind of censorship we're seeing, where I actually have a notebook where, oh, I don't have it ready to hand, but I was given a notebook the other day because my school's College of Social Work can no longer distribute these notebooks because the notebook says on the front that the College of Social Work is striving for a just and equitable future. And we've been told we cannot use the word equitable. That is censorship. Criticizing someone's research, disagreeing with a speaker, even going to a speech and shouting, none of these are censorship. The person who disrupts will be and probably should be removed because it is the obligation of the institution to make space for free speech, but it is not the individual's responsibility to simply listen to anything that is presented. And I think this is one of those tensions where the imagination of what leftist professors are supposedly doing is so inaccurate, but then we see what the right wants to do. And that for me reveals why they think that leftist professors are doing what they imagine we are doing. Because when they have the power, they do indeed censor thought. But in my classes, I teach LGBTQ media studies classes. I've had multiple students tell me things like, everything you're teaching is against God. This is blasphemous. They have every right to that opinion. And then I ask them to read the readings for the week, talk about them, and we have intellectual conversations and we dig into the material. And most of those students have ended up completing my class saying, I still disagree with you, but I learned a few things. I understand the discipline, and they got a grade they were happy with. And we were able to, have the kinds of intellectual conversations that college is meant to support. So I think, thank you for the question, Stephen. I hope I haven't gone on too long. But for me, it is just completely false to say that this is some sort of recent phenomenon and that the left is kind of like hoist on its own petard. It's like, no, these are very different dynamics. And it's important not to get them confused.
A quick follow-up. First of all, your students are so lucky to have you, whether they are in Florida or Maryland. Secondly, I just put in the chat a piece I did in the Daily Northwestern precisely on these issues. And you put it so well, you can condemn someone's ideology, their advocacy, their positions, their academic papers. That is your free speech. The problem comes in when those in authority, whether it's the government or a college administration, and by the way, either a public college or a private college that promises free speech through their student and faculty handbooks, they are subject to the same First Amendment standards that a public college is. And it's when power silences viewpoints that censorship takes hold. So I'm so gratified to hear you express it that way.
I was just asking if the censoring, unintentional or intentional censoring, is done by the left towards the right-leaning people, whether it's an issue of racism or an issue that they may disagree with and then consider quote quote negative. So therefore, censoring or silencing people. Thank you.
Absolutely, people on the left sometimes push back very strongly on right-leaning discourse, as I personally think we should. And I think that that is the essence of what a free society should offer, the opportunity to push back, to challenge. I personally haven't seen, in the classroom or in my institutions, the kinds of situations that the right describes as the reasons that these anti-DEI or other kinds of censorship laws are necessary. For example, in Florida, one of the things that we are forbidden from doing in the classroom now is compelling a student to feel guilty over things that their ancestors may have done. Now, have I ever tried to compel a student to feel guilty over something their ancestors did? Not only have I never tried that, it would never succeed. I can't compel them to read the syllabus. But no, on a serious level, you know, this idea is either disingenuous, and they know that we don't actually do that, but they felt like they could get a law passed that forbade that and would actually silence other kinds of speech as well, any kind of discussion of slavery, for example. Or they are imagining something that doesn't exist, rather than simply developing the skills to defend their beliefs in debate and in discourse. So yeah, that would be my take. And it is partly anecdotal, but partly based on the literature. And I think that having this opportunity to speak with you all has just been so rewarding. And I really appreciate having an interfaith space, because we also need to take back the idea that spirituality and religion are the property of the right. Religion and spirituality cannot be seen as the proper right. So thank you all.
No, thank you.
Thank you. What Rick is saying, we're so grateful, Nicole, and you are now a card-carrying member of ICUJP. We appreciate you so much. I know I'm going to be in touch with you, and others will. And you've added such a distinct and important perspective to all this. So thank you very much.